She was serving wine to billionaires when she spotted the trap that would steal $300 million. One whispered sentence from her lips saved a fortune. But speaking up cost her everything, or so she thought. This is the story of the woman nobody saw, until the day she decided to be seen. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll never look at the invisible people around you the same way again. This is a story about courage, about truth, about a waitress who brought a criminal empire to its knees with nothing but her mind. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you believe that one voice, even the quietest one, can change everything. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a woman named Sophie Reed. And before you think this is just another rags to riches story, let me stop you right there. Because this story isn't really about money. It's about something far more valuable. It's about being seen. Sophie was 24 years old, and she was invisible. Not literally, of course, but in every way that mattered. She simply didn't exist to the people around her. She worked as a server at the Crystal Room, this fancy restaurant in downtown Chicago where a single meal cost more than she made in a week. The wealthy elite came there to make deals, to show off, to feel important. And Sophie, she was just a pair of hands that brought them food. A ghost in a black uniform. But here's what nobody knew about Sophie Reed. This invisible waitress spoke 14 languages fluently. She could read ancient texts that most scholars had forgotten existed. Her father had been Professor David Reed, one of the most brilliant historians in the country, until his career was destroyed by a scandal that broke their family apart. Sophie should have been finishing her doctorate at university. Instead, she was carrying plates and forcing smiles while her mother lay in a hospital bed across town, fighting an illness that was draining every penny Sophie earned. The medical bills kept piling up. The rent was always late. And every night, Sophie went home to her tiny basement apartment and cried herself to sleep, wondering if her education, all those years of studying, all that knowledge in her head, would ever matter to anyone. That Tuesday night started like any other. The Crystal Room was packed with the usual crowd. Politicians, CEOs, people who wore watches that cost more than Sophie's yearly salary. She moved between tables like a shadow, refilling glasses, clearing plates, staying invisible. Then she heard the shouting. At table 7, there was a man named Daniel Cross. Everyone knew who he was. He was 36 years old, the youngest real estate developer to build a billion-dollar empire. He was known for transforming entire neighborhoods, for seeing potential where others saw nothing. Tonight, he looked like he was about to explode. This is unacceptable. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, making everyone in the restaurant turn and stare. In front of him was an old leather folder, and inside it, Sophie could see what looked like historical documents, yellowed with age. "Mr. Cross, please," one of his lawyers was saying, sweating through his expensive suit. "We've contacted every expert we know. Nobody can verify what this document says. The writing system is too obscure." Sophie approached the table to refill water glasses, her heart pounding. She knew she should stay quiet, keep her head down, stay invisible. But her eyes caught the document, and her breath stopped in her throat. She recognized it immediately. It was written in Old Prussian, a language that had been dead for centuries. But it wasn't just Old Prussian. It was written in a specific merchant's code that her father had spent years researching. A code that only a handful of people in the entire world would recognize. And Sophie could read it as easily as reading a newspaper. "Sir," the lawyer continued, "if we can't verify this land deed by tomorrow morning, we'll lose the property rights. 20 years of planning gone. The Wellington District project will collapse." Daniel Cross ran his hands through his dark hair, frustration radiating from every muscle in his body. "I'm about to invest $300 million based on documents I can't even read. Do you understand how insane that is?" Sophie's hands trembled as she poured water. She saw the text clearly now, and she saw the problem. The document wasn't just old. It was a trap, a very carefully constructed trap that would cost Daniel Cross everything. Her mind was screaming at her to speak up. But her fear was louder. What if she was wrong? What if she embarrassed herself in front of these powerful people? She needed this job. Her mother needed her. But then she thought about her father, Professor David Reed, who had taught her that knowledge without courage was useless, who had always said that the truth was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Sophie set down the water pitcher. "It's not a deed," she said quietly. The table went silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to look at her like she'd just appeared out of thin air. The manager, Mr. Peterson, materialized beside her, his face turning red. "I apologize, Mr. Cross. She's—" "Wait." Daniel Cross held up his hand. His gray eyes locked onto Sophie's face. "Really seeing her for the first time. What did you say?" Sophie's voice was steadier now. "That document. It's not a property deed. It's written in a merchant's code of Old Prussian. And if you sign a contract based on what you think it says, you're going to lose everything." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. One of the lawyers actually laughed. "A waitress is giving us historical analysis? This is absurd." But Daniel Cross wasn't laughing. He was studying Sophie with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight into her soul. "How do you know Old Prussian?" "My father was Professor David Reed. He taught medieval European history at Northwestern before." She paused, the old pain flashing through her. "Before his career ended. He taught me everything he knew." Daniel's expression changed. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Everyone in academic circles knew the name David Reed, the brilliant professor who had been destroyed by scandal. "Tell me what it says," Daniel said, pushing back his chair. "All of it." And just like that, Sophie Reed stopped being invisible. Sometimes your whole life can pivot on a single moment. For Sophie, this was that moment. Standing in that expensive restaurant, surrounded by people who had never noticed her before, she made a choice. She chose to be seen. "May I?" Sophie gestured toward the document. Daniel nodded, sliding the leather folder toward her. Her hands were shaking as she picked it up, but her mind was crystal clear. This was what she'd been trained for. This was why her father had spent countless nights teaching her, pushing her, refusing to let her give up even when the world had given up on him. The text was written in tight, precise script. Beautiful, really, if you knew what you were looking at. "This isn't a deed transferring ownership," Sophie began, her voice growing stronger. "It's a covenant document from the 1600s. The language is deliberately deceptive. See this phrase here?" She pointed to a section near the top. "In modern terms, it's saying that you can purchase the rights to develop the underground areas, but the surface land remains under the protection of the original family's descendants." One of the lawyers scoffed. "That's impossible. Our translation firm said it was a complete transfer." "Your translation firm doesn't understand the context," Sophie said, feeling a surge of confidence she hadn't felt in years. In Old Prussian merchant law, there was a concept called splitrecht, split rights. It was specifically designed to trick foreign investors. You'd think you were buying complete ownership, but legally, you'd only own what was beneath the ground. She looked directly at Daniel. "If you sign the contract tomorrow based on this document, you'll own the underground. But you won't be able to build anything on the surface. No buildings. No roads. No access. You'll have spent $300 million on property you can't use." The color drained from Daniel's face. "That can't be right. The city government assured us." "The city government either doesn't know, or they're hoping you don't find out until after you've signed," Sophie interrupted. "This is exactly the kind of scheme my father used to expose. Old families protecting their historical claims by using legal language nobody remembers." The table erupted in chaos. Lawyers were pulling out phones, calling experts, demanding verification. The manager was trying to pull Sophie away, apologizing profusely. But Daniel Cross just sat there, staring at her with those intense gray eyes. Finally, he stood up. He was tall, commanding, the kind of man who was used to controlling every room he entered. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "Except her." The lawyers protested, but something in Daniel's voice made them obey. Within minutes, the private dining area was empty except for Sophie and Daniel Cross. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sophie's heart was hammering. "Sir, I should get back to work. I'm sorry if I overstepped." "Sit down." It wasn't a request. She sat. Daniel leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "Do you know how many experts I've paid in the last 3 months? Historians, translators, legal consultants. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and not one of them caught what you just saw in 30 seconds. I had a good teacher," Sophie said softly. "Your father, David Reed." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know what happened to him. The forgery scandal. The accusations. How he lost everything." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "My father was set up. He found evidence that certain powerful people were selling fake historical artifacts. Before he could expose them, They destroyed his reputation, planted false evidence, made him look like the criminal. Her voice cracked. He drank himself to death within 5 years. Died believing the world thought he was a fraud. But he wasn't. No, he was the most honest man I've ever known. And it killed him. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Sarah, clear my schedule for the next 72 hours. Cancel the Wellington signing. And get me the full background report on that property claim. He hung up and turned back to Sophie. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to come with me to London tomorrow. There's a property dispute hearing that could make or break my company's expansion into Europe. I need someone who can read the original documents and tell me the truth. Someone who isn't afraid to speak up when everyone else is lying. Sophie's mouth went dry. Mr. Cross, I'm a waitress. I can't just. I'll pay you $50,000 for 1 week of your time. The number hit her like a physical blow. $50,000. That would cover her mother's medical bills for a year. Maybe more. I don't have a passport, that's. I'll handle it. My plane leaves from a private airfield. We don't need passports. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. This is my personal number. Text me your address. A car will pick you up in 3 hours. 3 hours? Sophie's head was spinning. The hearing is in 2 days. We need to prepare. Daniel stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Then he paused, really looking at her again. You saved me from losing $300 million tonight. You did that in 30 seconds, wearing a waitress uniform, while everyone else in this room was ignoring you. Imagine what you could do if people actually listened. He walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back. Sophie Reed. Stop being invisible. The world needs what you know. And then he was gone, leaving Sophie sitting alone at the table, her entire life suddenly balanced on the edge of a cliff. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. But for the first time in years, she wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from hope. The private jet was quieter than Sophie had imagined. She'd never been on a plane before, let alone one that looked like a luxury hotel suite in the sky. Cream leather seats. A bedroom in the back. Even a shower. She sat by the window, still wearing jeans and a sweater she'd grabbed from her apartment, feeling completely out of place. Daniel was across from her, typing on his laptop with fierce concentration. He'd barely said a word since they took off from Chicago. Sophie watched the clouds roll by beneath them and wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Stop overthinking, Daniel said without looking up from his screen. Excuse me? You're sitting there panicking, wondering if you made a mistake. Stop it. Now he did look up, and there was something almost kind in his eyes. You made the right choice. Trust yourself. How did you know what I was thinking? A slight smile. Because 3 years ago, I was broke and sleeping in my car. Someone gave me a chance when nobody else would. I took it, even though I was terrified. Best decision I ever made. Sophie blinked. You slept in your car. After my father died and left nothing but debt. The bank took our house. I was 21, had no college degree, just ideas and desperation. He closed his laptop. People see me now and think I was born into wealth. They have no idea what it took to build this. What it cost. There was pain in his voice. Real pain. Sophie realized that maybe Daniel Cross understood being invisible more than she thought. So what's in London? She asked. What's this hearing about? Daniel's expression hardened. There's a property developer named Victor Kane. He's been buying up historical estates across Europe and demolishing them to build luxury apartments. 3 months ago, I purchased the Ashford estate, a 17th-century manor house with protected status. I was planning to restore it, turn it into a heritage hotel. What happened? Kane produced documents claiming his family has original ownership rights dating back 300 years. If the court accepts his claim, I lose the property and the $20 million I invested. He gets to bulldoze a piece of history. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. And you think these documents are fake? I know they are. But proving it? That's where I need you. The rest of the flight, Daniel briefed her on the case. He showed her photographs of the disputed documents, letters written in various old forms of English and Latin. Sophie studied them carefully, her trained eye catching inconsistencies, but she couldn't be certain without seeing the originals. When they landed in London, a car was waiting. The city was gray and rainy, but beautiful in a way that made Sophie's heart ache. She'd always dreamed of traveling, but there'd never been money. Never been time. The hotel was 5-star, overlooking the Thames. Sophie's room was bigger than her entire apartment back home. She stood by the window, watching the river flow beneath the bridges, and allowed herself one moment of pure wonder. Then her phone rang. The hospital. Miss Reed? This is Nurse Patterson from St. Michael's. I'm calling about your mother. Sophie's heart stopped. What's wrong? Is she? She's stable, but there were some men here earlier. They came into her room while she was sleeping. Said they were family, but when I asked for ID, they left quickly. We've increased security, but I thought you should know. The fear hit Sophie like ice water. Did they hurt her? No, but they left something on her bedside table. A note. The nurse's voice dropped. It said, "Smart daughters should remember their place. Stop asking questions." Sophie's hand was shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. Don't let anyone near her. No one except the regular staff. I'll call you back. She ended the call and sat down on the bed, her mind racing. Someone knew she was helping Daniel. Someone was threatening her mother to make her stop. There was a sharp knock on the door. She opened it to find Daniel standing there, his face grim. Your mother? How did you? I have security monitoring potential threats. We picked up the incident at the hospital 30 seconds after it happened. He stepped into the room. I've already sent a private security team. They're stationed outside your mother's door right now. Nobody gets in without my clearance. Sophie felt tears burning behind her eyes. Who would do this? Why? Victor Kane doesn't just demolish buildings, Sophie. He destroys anyone who gets in his way. When I started investigating his documents, my lawyer had her office broken into. Another consultant I hired found her car vandalized. His voice was cold, controlled fury. He's trying to scare you off. It's working, Sophie whispered. My mother is all I have. If something happened to her because of me, look at me. Daniel's voice was firm. He waited until she met his eyes. We have two choices. We can back down, let him win, let him keep getting away with this. Or we can fight back. But I need you to understand something. If we do this, we do it all the way. No half measures. We expose him completely. Sophie thought about her father. How he'd died broken, believing he'd lost. How men like Victor Kane had crushed him with lies and left him with nothing. She thought about all the years she'd stayed invisible, stayed quiet, stayed safe. And she realized something. Safety was an illusion. They'd threatened her mother anyway. They'd found her anyway. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady now. Daniel's smile was sharp as a blade. Tomorrow we go to war. And you're going to help me destroy him. The Royal Courts of Justice in London looked like a cathedral. Gothic spires, ancient stone, rooms that had witnessed centuries of justice and corruption in equal measure. Sophie walked through the massive doors beside Daniel, and every eye in the lobby turned to stare. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform today. Daniel's assistant had provided her with a tailored charcoal suit that fit perfectly, her hair pulled back in a professional style. She looked like she belonged here. But inside, her stomach was doing flips. The hearing room was smaller than she expected, but no less intimidating. Wood-paneled walls, a judge's bench that seemed impossibly high, and rows of seats filled with lawyers and observers. And there, across the aisle, sat Victor Kane. He was older than Sophie expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked like someone's kind grandfather. But when his gaze landed on Sophie, she saw the coldness beneath. The calculation. He knew who she was, and he wanted her to know that he knew. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The Honorable Justice Margaret Thornberry was a severe-looking woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. We're here regarding the ownership dispute of the Ashford estate, she began. Mr. Kane's counsel, you may present your evidence. Kane's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Roberts, stood up. Your Honor, we have documents dating to 1687 proving that the Kane family holds the original deed to the Ashford property. The current sale to Mr. Cross is therefore invalid. He presented 3 aged documents, sealed in protective cases. They were placed on the evidence table, and Sophie felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This was her moment. The judge examined them briefly. These appeared to be authentic historical documents. Mr. Cross, do you have evidence to the contrary? Daniel stood. We do, Your Honor. My historical consultant, Miss Sophie Reed, has identified several critical inconsistencies in these documents. With your permission, I'd like her to present her findings. Victor Kane's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, with all respect, who is this consultant? Does she have credentials? Academic publications? Or is she just another hired expert telling Mr. Cross what he wants to hear? The judge looked at Sophie. Miss Reed, what are your qualifications? Sophie stood, her legs shaking but her voice clear. Your Honor, I studied medieval European history under Professor David Reed at Northwestern University. I've spent my entire life learning to read historical documents in their original languages and contexts. But you never completed your degree? No, Your Honor. My father passed away, and I had to leave school to support my family. Kane's lawyer smirked. So we're supposed to trust the opinion of a university dropout? The words stung, but Sophie didn't flinch. Your Honor, credentials don't determine truth. Evidence does. And I can prove these documents are forgeries. The judge leaned forward. Then do so, Miss Reed. But be very certain of what you're saying. False accusations of forgery in this court carry serious consequences. Sophie walked to the evidence table. Her hands were steady now. This was what her father had trained her for. This was why he'd spent all those nights teaching her, even when he was broken and defeated. He'd been preparing her for this moment. She put on the white gloves provided and carefully picked up the first document. This purports to be a land deed from 1687. The paper is correct, 17th century rag paper, appropriately aged. The ink appears period appropriate. The handwriting style matches the era. Then what's the problem? The judge asked. The language, Your Honor. Sophie pointed to a specific phrase. This document uses the term freehold absolute. That exact legal phrase wasn't introduced into English property law until the Law of Property Act of 1925. In 1687, they would have used the term fee simple or estate in fee. The courtroom went silent. Furthermore, Sophie continued, her confidence building, look at the way the letter S is written here. It's a modern lowercase s. In 1687, they used what's called a long S that looks almost like an F. Every authentic document from that period would have this feature. This document doesn't, because it was written by someone in the 20th or 21st century copying from a textbook without understanding the actual historical practice. Kane's lawyer was sweating now. That's speculation. Handwriting varied. It's not speculation, Sophie cut him off. She picked up the second document. This one claims to be from 1702. But the watermark in the paper shows a manufacturer's mark from a mill that didn't exist until 1823. I can provide the historical records of paper mills in this region to prove it. She looked directly at Victor Kane. These aren't historical documents. They're very expensive forgeries. And whoever made them knew just enough to fool most people, but not enough to fool someone who actually understands history. The judge's expression had gone from skeptical to fascinated. Mr. Kane, do you have a response to these allegations? Victor Kane stood up, his mask of kindness slipping. Your Honor, this is absurd. My family has held these documents for generations. Then you won't mind if we carbon date the paper? Daniel interjected smoothly. If Miss Reed is wrong, the test will prove the documents are genuine. If she's right, they'll prove they're modern forgeries. Shall we arrange for testing? Kane's face went white. That won't be necessary. We may have been mistaken about the provenance of these documents. Perhaps there was confusion in our family records. Confusion? The judge's voice was ice. Mr. Kane, you have brought forged evidence before this court in an attempt to steal property through fraud. This is a serious criminal matter. As the judge called for the bailiffs, Sophie watched Victor Kane's world collapse. Security escorted him out, his lawyer frantically trying to distance himself from his client. Daniel turned to Sophie, and the look in his eyes made her heart skip. You did it, he said quietly. You actually did it. But Sophie was thinking about her father, wishing he could have been here to see this. To see his daughter using everything he taught her to expose exactly the kind of fraud that had destroyed him. This was for you, Dad, she whispered. The flight back to Chicago felt different. Sophie sat in the same leather seat, but she wasn't the same person anymore. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. She'd stood in front of a judge, faced down a powerful man, and won, with nothing but truth and knowledge. Daniel was watching her from across the cabin. You're different, he observed. What do you mean? You're not trying to disappear anymore. You're not making yourself small. He smiled. It suits you. Sophie looked out the window at the ocean far below. I spent so long thinking that being invisible was safer. That if I stayed quiet, kept my head down, nothing bad would happen to me or my mom. But they came after us anyway. I realized that silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you an easier target. Your father would be proud. The words hit her harder than expected. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. He died thinking he was a failure. Thinking the world believed he was a fraud. I wish I could tell him. I wish he knew that everything he taught me mattered. That it saved people. That he wasn't wrong. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about him. The real him. Not the scandal. Not the ending. Who was David Reed before the world broke him?" So Sophie talked. She told Daniel about her father's terrible jokes, how he'd make puns in Latin that only he found funny. How he'd take her to museums on Saturdays and spend hours in front of a single artifact, teaching her to see the stories hidden in the details. How he'd believed that understanding the past was the only way to build a better future. He used to say that every historical document was a message in a bottle, Sophie said, smiling through her tears. Someone from the past trying to tell us something important. And it was our job to make sure the message was heard correctly. Not twisted. Not corrupted. Just the truth. That's what you did in London, Daniel said softly. You made sure the truth was heard. When they landed in Chicago, Sophie expected to go straight home. Instead, Daniel's car took them to St. Michael's Hospital. Sophie's heart raced as they rode the elevator to her mother's floor, worried about what she might find. But when they entered the room, her mother was sitting up in bed, looking better than she had in weeks. The security guards Daniel had posted were stationed discreetly outside. "Sophie," her mother's face lit up. "They told me you were in London. What on earth?" Sophie hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's lavender lotion. "I'll explain everything, Mom. But first, I need to tell you something." She sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. "The medical bills. All of them. They're paid. Everything. The treatments you need, the medications, it's all covered." Her mother's eyes went wide. "Sophie, how?" "I use my brain, Mom. Just like Dad taught me. I helped someone and he paid me. A lot." Sophie smiled. "You don't have to worry anymore. About money, about insurance, about anything. We're going to be okay." Her mother started crying, which made Sophie cry, and they held each other like they hadn't been able to in years. All the fear, all the stress, all the impossible weight of keeping them both alive. It was finally lifting. Daniel had stepped out to give them privacy, but when Sophie emerged an hour later, he was waiting in the hallway. "Thank you," she said. "For the security. For everything. There's one more thing." Daniel pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. The headline read, "Property developer Victor Kane arrested for fraud. Historical forgery ring exposed." Sophie read the article, her eyes widening. It detailed how Kane had been creating forged documents for years, stealing properties from legitimate owners across Europe and America. The case Sophie had helped win had cracked open an entire criminal enterprise. "They're investigating 23 other properties now," Daniel said. "Because of you. Because you weren't afraid to speak up." "I was terrified," Sophie admitted. "But you did it anyway. That's what courage is." He paused. "Sophie, I want to offer you something permanent. Not just a one-time consultant fee. A real position. Director of Historical Verification for Cross-Development. You'd review all our property acquisitions, make sure we're not being defrauded, help us preserve historical sites instead of destroying them." Sophie's breath caught. "Daniel, I'm not even a college graduate. You're the smartest historian I've ever met, and I've worked with department heads from Oxford and Harvard. The degree doesn't matter. Your knowledge does. Your integrity does." He met her eyes. "I'm offering you $200,000 a year, full benefits, and the resources to hire a team. Build a department dedicated to preserving history. What do you say?" Sophie thought about the basement apartment she'd been living in. About the restaurant that had never seen her as anything but a servant. About all the years she'd believed her education was worthless, that her father's legacy was shame. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." 3 months later, Sophie stood in front of a university lecture hall. The invitation had come from Northwestern, her father's old department. They wanted her to give a guest lecture on detecting historical forgeries. The room was packed with students, professors, journalists. As Sophie walked to the podium, she noticed something hanging on the wall, a portrait of her father, Professor David Reed, in the gallery of distinguished faculty. They'd reinstated him. Posthumously, yes. But his name was cleared. His legacy restored. Sophie placed her notes on the podium and looked out at the audience. For years, she'd been invisible. Now, dozens of faces looked back at her with attention, respect, eager to hear what she had to say. My father taught me that history isn't about the past, she began. It's about the truth. And the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how small you feel, no matter how powerless they tell you that you are. Because knowledge is power. And the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the most money or the highest position. It's the one who knows the truth and isn't afraid to speak it. As she spoke, she thought about that night in the crystal room, when she'd been just another invisible waitress, when she'd made the choice to speak up instead of staying silent. That choice had changed everything. Not because it made her rich, not because it made her famous, but because it reminded her that she'd never been invisible at all. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to be seen. And now, finally, the world was listening. This story reminds us that your value isn't determined by your job title or your bank account. It's determined by who you are, what you know, and whether you have the courage to use your gifts when it matters most. Sophie's father taught her to seek truth. Life taught her to speak it, and that made all the difference.